Okay, welcome everybody. We apologize for the 10-minute delay in getting started here. This is the Manhattan GMAT Study Hall 2nd edition. All right. So the MGMAT Study Hall number 2. The way this is going to operate is we've got 4 problems which are from the GMAT prep, and all of which I believe have been posted on the forums. But there are some special points within these problems that we're going to use as talking points and takeaways for discussion. So everybody give me the smiley face over here, the little clickable smiley face, if you can hear me okay. All good? Okay, I see a lot of clickable smiley faces. I see one character named Shauna with no sound, but I can see from my icons on the screen that actually that's a problem on your end. So a hardware problem of some sort. Okay, let's get going here with a problem about sulfur dioxide. Okay, so here's how we're going to run this. Here's the problem, and as you would on the actual test, go ahead and take about, this is a medium length problem, so let's say maybe a minute 10, minute 15. So I'll put the timer on your screen, and I will let you loose. When you answer the question, I'm going to put multiple choice answers for you in the corner. They should have just appeared. When you finish, pick A, B, C, or D, or E in the top left corner of your screen. So if you notice up there, I don't really have a pointer that points up and left, but up there at the top corner of your screen. Do not type it into the text window, please. Okay, go for it. All right, so the timer has timed out. Those of you who have not yet selected an answer, please select an answer. And then we will have a discussion. We've got an ALA and we've got a DEV1 who do not have answers indicated. So please indicate an answer. The choices are up there at the top left of your screen. Okay. Does anybody with a mic, does anybody want to explain how they answered this problem and why? And we'll take your answer, whether it's correct or not, and make a discussion out of it. If you want to get on the mic, go ahead and press the raise your hand button here, and we'll do this in order. At the left-hand part of your screen over here, there's a raise your hand button. If anybody knows how to use the mic on this program and wants to answer the question, then you can indicate that over here. Anybody? If not, we'll just have a discussion led by me. Nobody. Okay, so what I want to talk about here is, ironically, there are a lot of issues in this problem, most of which deal with idioms. Okay, in fact, there are several idioms in this problem. Let me indicate where some of those are. Okay, so bunch of idioms. Let's highlight some of those that appear in this problem. One of them is because it diminishes and because of diminishing. That's an idiom split. There's another one in there which is ability to deal versus capability to deal versus capability in dealing versus capability of dealing. This is like the idiom of nightmares. And then there's ability to deal. So let's edit those boxes so that we can tell what's in it. So that's a single idiom. And then there's also the word choice of especially versus specially. But ironically, what I want to talk about is one of the non-issues in this problem. The most important part of this problem turns out to be something that doesn't matter, which is, did anybody not pick A because of this word? If you smiley face if you didn't pick A because you saw it here and thought that was a problem. Are there any smiley faces on that? Because I see quite a few answers other than A. So does anybody know, type in the text box, if anybody knows what people might think is a problem with this word. Yeah, I see it from one person. We got a couple other typing shy people here. Yeah, and some people are saying misplaced pronoun. I'm not quite sure what you mean by misplaced, but some people are going to look at this and are going to think, gee whiz, I don't know what this pronoun stands for. Because technically, that's an ambiguous pronoun. So we get on here. Technically, this is an ambiguous pronoun because there are two possible antecedents that match it in number. Okay, we have sulfur dioxide and we have acid rain. Okay, in context, people go ahead and indicate in the text box, in context, what does this stand for? And what is it supposed to stand for? Is it supposed to be sulfur dioxide, or is it supposed to be acid rain? Okay, so this is definitely intended to be sulfur dioxide. So the question is, why is this okay? Because the correct answer to this problem is A. And so we have a correct answer that allows an ambiguous pronoun. And so what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to refine our rules dealing with ambiguous pronouns a little bit, because it turns out that this is not an absolute rule. So we'll start a new slide here with the headline of refining our understanding of ambiguous pronouns. In other words, pronoun ambiguity is not an absolute rule. Okay, so in other words, there are some instances in which an ambiguous pronoun is okay, but other instances in which it is not okay. So let me give you a little bit of background here. Little bit of background. The background is, consider the following sentence. Okay, let's say you're talking to someone on the phone, and they say, take the pizza out of the box and put it, and then they get cut off. Okay, so if this is all you hear, take the pizza out of the box and put it, then what is your first instinct as to what it stands for? Not turn off your grammar brain, turn off your sort of mechanical thought processes here, and turn on your intuition. If you think it stands for the pizza, put that in the text box, and if you think it's the box, put that in the text box. Okay, so if you look at people's answers in the text box, we have absolutely uniform responses of the pizza. Okay. In other words, your brain pretty much automatically, your brain and intuition automatically associate it with the pizza, even though we have a perfectly respectable other antecedent, even though it's technically ambiguous. And this is always the result in any class for which this example is shown. I mean, there's no reason you couldn't put the box somewhere also. It could be take the pizza out of the box and put the box into the garbage can. But there's an automatic association with the pizza and it, even though this is further away from the pronoun. Does anybody know how to explain this puzzling result? Does anybody want to type it in the text box? Any hypotheses as to why you think this association is made? Because this lies at the heart of when we are okay with ambiguous pronouns versus when we are not. So does anybody have any guesses? Okay, so we're looking at parts of speech. Let's look at parts of speech. And let's do an analysis and see precisely what is going on here. Let's look at parts of speech here. Okay, take the pizza out of the box. And then and is a conjunction. Put it. Okay, let's analyze. So it's not so much parts of speech. Let's look at grammatical roles is probably a better way to say this. Let's look at grammatical roles played by the different words. Okay, so if we look at what these things are doing in a sentence, a couple of you have nailed this. Okay, take is an action. This is an action verb. And then the pizza is a direct object. And then as a couple of you have pointed out, accurately enough, this is a preposition. And this is an object of that preposition. But then if you take a look at the second clause, we have another action verb. And we have another direct object. So notice that this is parallel to the pronoun. And this is not parallel to the pronoun. So this is the distinction. Everybody give me a smiley face if you guys understand what this point is. Like, this word, which is the word that all of you, without exception, associated with it, is parallel to the pronoun in question, and this word is not. So now here's the difference. There's one more consideration, which is that sometimes the context is obvious and sometimes it's not. But in general, here's your lesson. Here's your big takeaway that's super important here. The important takeaway is that the GMAT will usually tolerate pronoun ambiguity if, number one, the context is obvious, which this is the one shortcoming of the pizza example. We'll get to that in a second. Number two is the pronoun is parallel to the intended noun. And then number three, the pronoun is not parallel to the other nouns. Okay. So let's finish this sentence off with a little bit of context, and that'll address the question that's in the text box right now. So let's finish it with into the oven. If we do this, so if we add this little bit of context, then we're not going to put a box into an oven. So this added context makes it obvious that we're talking about a pizza. This added context makes it clear that pizza is the intended referent and that box is not. So this sentence, once we have this here, notice that you guys automatically viscerally made this association without even having this context. But if you also have a context that clarifies what's happening in this problem, then it will always work to the benefit of the pronoun. So if you have an obvious enough context, a pronoun that's parallel to the intended noun and also not parallel to the other nouns, then that pronoun ambiguity will be tolerated. And so you really have to know this because it's not as easy of an elimination as you might think. Okay, this is not the case with other rules concerning pronouns. Okay, there are still some rules with pronouns that are absolutely absolute rules. For instance, you have to use pronouns to stand for nouns, and no amount of dancing around the issue can get a pronoun to stand for something else. But here's your takeaway. So smiley faces if you understand what we're saying here, and non-smiley other faces if you don't. Okay, let me scroll. Okay, so I think we've got a pretty good receptive audience here. So if we go back to this problem, let's check. Let's check our three conditions here. So we've got, is the context clear? Is the context clear? I would say yes, because we know it's supposed to be sulfur dioxide. Everybody in the text box that answered this question got that correct. In other words, there's nobody in this room, at least nobody who spoke up, who thinks that it's supposed to be acid rain. So is it parallel to the intended antecedent? Well, let's check. What role does sulfur dioxide play in this clause? Just go ahead and type in the text box. What is the grammatical role played by sulfur dioxide here? It is the what of that clause. It is the subject. So this is the subject of clause. And this is the object of preposition. And it is the what in the text box. What does it do in its respective clause? It is the of its own clause. Notice that the clause following because is another clause. This clause up here, sulfur dioxide is a pollutant. That's one clause. And then it diminishes is another clause. So one of the users here called Skinkin' Dinky Doo or something is correct. This is the subject. Because notice this is the subject and this is the verb. So we do have the parallelism that we require. And so that is a big resounding yes to this question as to whether we have the requisite parallel structure. Question is, could we have ignored the content between the commas? Well, when we're talking about the grammatical roles, then yes. Like, for instance, to determine that this is the subject, you can safely ignore this modifier and just say sulfur dioxide is a pollutant. However, you got to be careful because the whole reason we have an issue in the first place here is because acid rain is the second reference. So if we just ignore that content completely, then we don't even realize there's an issue here. And then the last part of this is that we have to be non-parallel to the wrong words. Well, the wrong word in this case is acid rain. So are we non-parallel to acid rain? You bet we are. So are there any questions about this? Any questions? If there are, go ahead and type in the text box. Okay, I know there's a couple people typing, so I'll wait until you guys' questions are in the box. And then we'll go from there. Okay, one user called RG. While the questions are being typed, let's go ahead and address the rest of these considerations here. Yeah, okay, so let's look at the rest of the problem. The rest of the problem, we're going to need to make a separate slide for that. So other issues in the problem. One of them is especially versus specially. Okay, especially means basically to an unusually high degree, or more so than comparable things. So if we say, as an example, if I say something like, these paintings are all attractive, but that one is especially attractive because of its use of contrast or chiaroscuro or some of these art terms. So notice that especially just means it's more attractive than the other ones are. So just to a greater degree, especially to a greater degree. Specially is the adverb form of special. This is the adverb form of special, so it just means done in a special manner. So, like this dish, which is not on the normal menu, was specially prepared for our guest. Something like this. So this means it was prepared in a way that is special. It wouldn't make any sense to use especially here because there's no matters of degree here. So everybody smiley face if you understand this distinction. Smiley face. Okay, good. So let's take it back to the problem. Problem is here. So this means that it's more serious than other pollutants to a higher degree. So this is what we want. We want it to be especially and not specially. So we would kill choices D and E for that reason. As far as the other stuff, there are just idioms here. I mean, a couple of other posters have asked us to explain other differences here. These are mostly just idioms. If you say because of verb ing, this is incorrect because of the reason, I mean, same reason any other idiom is correct. It's just because it's an incorrect idiom, period, end of story. So if you just have to kind of know that. So because of diminishing doesn't work. And then you have to follow because with a clause, or if you say because of noun. So the correct versions, you can either say because and then followed by a whole clause. And that's what A does. Or because of noun. Those are the two correct versions of that idiom. The other idioms, capability of dealing, I'm not sure on that one. I actually don't 100% know whether this is right or wrong. Ability to deal is definitely correct. Capability in dealing is definitely incorrect. You can't pair capability with in. So just because you can't. Again, it's another one of those things where the idiom rules just because it does. So this is a bad idiom. So that's enough reason to rule that out. And then capability to deal is not right. It's ability to deal. It's usually a capability of and an ability to. Although I'm not sure on this one. I'd have to look at other problems involving capability to really make a judgment here. But this is definitely not correct. I'm not quite sure how the GMAT would handle B and D, so I'm sort of reluctant to pass definite judgment on those. Although because of diminishing is definitely wrong. So you can use that as an eliminator here. I'd have to do more research and capability, the problem is you can find differing opinions on that sort of thing. So you would have to look at official problems and somehow find an official opinion on that. Okay, any other questions about this problem? Especially dealing with pronoun ambiguity. So, okay, it looks like no one is typing. So let's, in summary, let me give you a couple of problems to look at. I can't post official guide problems on here, but let me just give you two problem numbers. Okay, reference problems. If you have verbal first edition, then your problem numbers are going to be different than if you have verbal second edition. So I'll go ahead and put different. I'll put both of those on there. The one that's number 71 in the first edition, sorry, it's number 71 in the second edition verbal book, the verbal supplement, not the big OG, just the verbal supplement. 71 in the second edition, and then it's also, let me find it in the, let's see, hold on a second. Sorry, it's number 68 in the second edition, and it's number 71 in the first edition. So this problem is pronoun ambiguity that does not work. Okay, and then if you want an example of a problem with acceptable pronoun ambiguity, you can go to number 21 in the new edition, which is number 19 in the old edition. So that's 19 or 21, depending on which book you have. And this is another example of acceptable pronoun ambiguity. Again, let me stress that these are verbal supplements. These are not the big OG. This one is purple. This one is blue. So I'm sure all of you have at least one of these, and some of you might even have both. But these are the same problem. Okay, let's move on to another problem here in just a second. Let's look at this problem right here. Okay. I'm going to give you a little bit more time than you need to do this problem because I'm going to go run to the bathroom really quickly. But I'm going to put a minute and a half on the screen, and then your A through E answers have been cleared. So again, indicate your A through E answer when you're done. I'll be back in just a second. Okay, the time has expired. I'm sure it's actually been expired for a little while. So most of you have this correct, but let's talk about this real quickly. Probably there are two issues of subject-verb agreement in this problem. One of them is this one. So does anybody know how let's make this as explicit as we can. Why are we looking for subject-verb agreement here? Like what tells us that that is the issue in the first place? Anybody know? You can type into the text box. Okay, yeah, it's a split. As far as numbers goes, I think some people have a little bit of an overemphasis on 2-3 split, 2-2-1, 4-1. I mean, it doesn't really matter what the numbers are as long as you know that it's a split. So it's because you see singular and you see plural. Okay, this is important. Has been is singular, has been is singular, have been is plural, have been is plural, and then are is plural. So that's how you know. We're going to need to use another slide for takeaways here, so the problem will appear again in a second. It's been taken off the screen for just a second. But takeaways from the previous problem. First takeaway is that if you see a split involving singular and plural verbs, you should look for subject-verb agreement. I mean, you shouldn't always. In other words, like some people tend to look for subject-verb agreement no matter what. And in some issues, that's not the point. Like if you have past tense verbs, for example, versus past perfect, then subject-verb is not an issue, because those don't change according to singular and plural. But these do. So does anybody know what the subject is of this and why? Text box, what is the subject? So a few of you are indicating, yeah, the subject is period. Okay, now who knows why? Let's type into the text box a quick explanation of why. Subject is period. Let's indicate that and highlight it. The rest is a modifier. Yeah, everything that is encased in these parentheses is a modifier. So when, and then an entire clause, that's a whole subordinate clause, therefore it's a modifier. So another important takeaway here is this. There are two ways to find subject-verb agreement. Two ways to locate the subject of a verb. The first is mechanically, which is probably how most of you are doing this. You eliminate intervening modifiers. So that's what we did here. All this stuff that's indicated in blue is an intervening modifier. So the idea is that we can just kill it. Like this doesn't matter because it's just a modifier. The other way to do it, which is not quite as good, but which will still get you a lot of mileage in certain situations, is context. I mean, basically, just think about the literal meaning of the problem. Like in this case, all you got to do is ask exactly what was established. So if you look back at this problem, you can say, well, what has been established? Well, definitely the period, not the people, and not any of this other stuff. It's the period, so that must be the subject. It's better to use this sort of mechanical consideration if you can, because some contexts are ambiguous, whereas eliminating intervening modifiers is never ambiguous. But now, here's where it gets tricky. What is the subject of that one? Because this is a problem where a lot of people just sort of get lucky, where they have completely the wrong subject in mind, but they just kind of luck out. So what is, let's get the text box here. This is plural, this is singular, this is singular, this is plural, and that's singular. Okay, any other opinions on what is the subject? So far, everything that everybody has typed is wrong. The subject is not the reason, and it's definitely not the reason we use and the meaning, because that would be plural. Okay, there's a correct answer. I don't know if you guys can see the text box, but the subject of this clause is what is most, or what is much more difficult to determine. That, folks, is the subject. Okay, a couple of notes here, by the way. The first note is that you cannot separate out the reason for their decoration from those other things. Okay, if you have a list, this is a list. Okay, bear with me. I'm going to make this outline work here. Okay, let's cover that up. Oh, that's pretty. Okay. Okay, this is a list. This list is indivisible. Okay, this list must be treated as one piece. As one piece. So it's impossible for just the reason to be the subject of anything. So i.e., you can't treat the reason by itself as a subject. That's really important, and we're going to get more into that in a second. But you really, really, really cannot break up lists. And that gives you almost absurd consequences, but we'll talk about that in just a second. But this is the subject. What is much more difficult to determine? The pronoun what is the subject. So this is not a backward construction. And what I want to illustrate here is the following. I'm going to give you 3 sentences, and we're going to decide what is the subject. We're going to decide on verbs here. So here are 3 sentences. First one is the hardest part of the exam was or were. 3 questions at the end. Second one, the 3 questions at the end was or were the hardest part of the exam. And then thirdly, harder than anything else on the exam was or were the 3 questions at the end. Okay, go ahead and indicate in the text box your answers to all 3 of these things. So just like separate them with commas or something. So like if you think it's was every time, then you would put was. Let's see what you guys come up with here. Okay, so most people are pretty much uniformly getting the first 2 of these right, but we're about 50-50 split on the last one. So let's talk about the first 2. And let me give you a couple of rules here. All right. The first thing is you got to know what kinds of things can't be subjects. Okay, so items, things that can't be subjects Okay, objects of verbs can't be subjects. Objects of prepositions can't be subjects. Subordinate clauses can't be subjects. Like, although subordinate clauses have their own subjects and verbs. Although these have their own separate subjects and verbs, etc. So, like, basically, all the stuff you would eliminate on subject-verb agreement problems. This is stuff that's not allowed to be subject. So, but this rule, smiley face, if you guys know this stuff, I mean, most of you probably do, but let's just verify this. If you know this much, that these things can't be subjects, then give me the smiley face icon, please. It's not a lot of smiley face icons. Okay, when we're talking about eliminating, it's like this. This thing that we crossed off here is a subordinate clause. So the period, when, blah, 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 blah. Great Painted Caves, for example, is not a subject because it's trapped in a subordinate clause. Okay, like, this is the subject of this other verb, which is trapped inside this clause. But the Great Painted Caves is not the subject of this main sentence. So you can't do that. And you also, anything like carbon-14 dating can't be because it's by carbon-14 dating, which is a prepositional phrase, and so on. So these things are not the subjects of the main sentence. If that makes sense, then give me the smiley face icon. Okay, we're getting a lot. Okay, it's good. A lot of smiley faces. So here's the rule. The rule is this. The problem comes about where if you have a sentence that says, like, X is Y, or X was Y, or were, etc., then sometimes it's hard to tell. Sometimes it's hard to tell which is the subject. For example, in the previous problem, the majority of you misidentified the subject of this. Because we have what is much more difficult to determine is blah, 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 blah. And a lot of you, if not most of you, thought blah, 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 blah was the subject. So here's the rule. Solution is surprisingly simple, actually. It's kind of cool. If anything before the verb can be the subject, then that's the subject. If nothing before the verb can be the subject, then you have what's called a backward construction, in which the subject follows the verb. Okay, an example of let me give you an easier example of a backward construction before we go to those examples that are up there. An easier example of a backward construction is if I tell you something like, on the table, let's say we got something like this, is or are two cell phones. Okay, everybody indicate in the text box whether this is or whether it's are. Okay, excellent. Everybody's got this one right. Because the subject is, indicate in the text box, please, what is the subject? Subject is two cell phones. Now the reason why that's the subject is because this is a prepositional phrase, and so can't be the subject. This is a prepositional phrase, so therefore table is ineligible to be the subject. So table is ineligible to be the subject. So the only thing that's left here is two cell phones. I mean, that has to be the subject. And so two cell phones are. So we turn our attention to this. Harder than anything else on the exam. Than anything else on the exam is, I don't know if that is a prepositional, I don't actually know what that's called, but it behaves exactly like a prepositional phrase. And then harder is not a noun. So this is a modifier. And then this is not a noun. Harder is an adjective. So there's nothing in front of this that can be the subject. So because there's nothing in front of the verb that can be the subject, we are forced into a backward construction. And so the subject, as many of you pointed out in this case, is the three questions at the end. So the three questions in particular. And so the harder than anything else on the exam were the three questions at the end. On the other hand, these first two sentences, the hardest part of the exam, so of the exam is ineligible, we can knock that off. And then hardest is just an adjective, and the is just an article. So we're left with part as the subject, was the three questions at the end. And then the three questions at the end is a prepositional phrase. So the three questions as the subject were the hardest part of the exam. So here's your takeaway in that regard. Okay, if anything before the verb can be the subject, then it's the subject, period, end of story. You only use backward constructions when there's nothing in front, whether it's a pronoun or a noun or whatnot, that can be the subject. Smiley faces if you guys understand this material. Okay, excellent. So if we step back to the question here, that's why this is the subject of this segment. Okay. Questions. All right, now there's one more thing I want to bring up, which is that this list must be treated as a single piece. Okay, this is also an extremely important criterion here. So let me give you an example. If you have a list, if you have an X and Y construction, if you have a compound subject, which is X and Y, or a list, like such as X, Y, and Z, that should be a comma, not a period. Punctuation mark. Then you should treat that as you would treat a single plural verb. Or sorry, plural noun. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here, since that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Here's my example. If I say something like, James and Stephanie met to discuss her homework. Okay, now notice that James is a male and Stephanie is a female. So if you think this is okay, then give me a yes in the text box. And if you think this is not okay, then give me a no in the text box. So you've got some divided opinions here. Most of you think that it's okay. It actually turns out that this is not okay. And let me explain why here. This is a compound noun. So if you say James and Stephanie, you got to treat this like a single word. Okay, you should act as though this is one word. So this is every bit as wrong as pulling like 4 letters out of an 8-letter word. Like this is like you can't use a pronoun to refer to half a word. So it's a difficult concept, but James and Stephanie, as far as you're concerned, is one piece. This is like using a pronoun to refer to half a word. Like the first 4 letters of an 8-letter word. It's just you can't do that. So this is not okay because as far as you're concerned, so give me in the text box, what is the only pronoun that we would be able to use in this sentence, in the text box? What pronoun would be okay? Yeah, we could say they, right? So therefore, the only pronoun we can use right now would be they. So there's 2 ways to fix this. And both of them involve not using her, at least not using the way it is now. The first way to do it is to break up the list. So you could say something like, James met with Stephanie to discuss her homework. This is okay. Or there. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying we can use it in this context. I'm just saying in any context involving James and Stephanie. So not just this one context. So if that doesn't clear, and people who typed in the text box, if that doesn't clear that up, then just type again. One way to handle this is to break up the list. James met with Stephanie to discuss her homework. This is okay, because now her is Stephanie's. The other way to do it is to just repeat words. So if you say something like, James met with Stephanie to discuss Stephanie's homework. This is okay. But the point is, you've got to consider this. So, I mean, this whole list is like one word. This is like one word. And that would be plural. So if you had something like more difficult to determine, then this would be R. So let me give you an example of this. I'm going to try to fit it down here. Choice F could be something like has been established by C14 dating, but more difficult to determine R. And then that's F, and then I'll also give you G, and then I'll have you guys pick. Okay, that's choice F. And now here's choice G. Okay, if you guys like F, then put F in the text box. Like if you think F is okay. If you think G is okay, put G in the text box. If you think they are both okay, then put F or G. And if you think neither is okay, put neither. See some more votes here. Okay, we've got plurality in favor of the correct one. The correct one in this case is F, not G. Because this is kind of like on the table are two cell phones. Okay, on the table is not, there's nothing in here that can be a subject. And there's definitely nothing in here that can be a subject because there are no nouns. I mean, this more difficult to determine doesn't even contain any nouns. So this is forced to be a backward construction. And as we just got done saying, this is a list, so it is forced to be plural. Like it is impossible to treat this as singular. So you cannot say on the table is two cell phones because two cell phones is plural. And for the same reason, you also cannot say more difficult to determine is this stuff. That would be incorrect because this stuff is plural. So in this example, F would be also acceptable, and G would be unacceptable. Any questions about that? The text box, if anybody's got any questions. Smiley face if you guys understand why F is okay and G is not okay. Again, it's another addition of this rule that if we have no eligible subjects, then you force yourself into a backward construction. So you only use backward constructions when you are forced to. That's basically the rule. Like if you have a normal subject, then it's the subject. And only when there are no subjects at all in front of this, then you go with backward construction. So back to James and Stephanie. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's say that, here's a little bit of background. Here's some background. Let's say that Professor X won a Nobel Prize. And that Professors X and Y are standing on a stage. Okay, there's your context. Here's your sentence. On the stage are Professor X, Professor Y rather, who recently won a Nobel Prize for his work in topic Z. Okay, if you think this sentence is all right, then put yes in the text box. If you think this sentence is incorrect, then put no in the text box. Go for it. Okay, we have an overwhelming majority of no's. Does anybody who put no want to explain why? Okay, let's assume that Professor X at least is male. We don't know if Professor Y is male or female, but Professor X, I guess, is a guy. So what's wrong with the sentence? See if you can explain in the text box. Yeah, exactly. Again, some of you guys are, I don't know how much of the text box that you guys can see that each other is typing. I can see everything from the moderator, but the problem is that you have to treat these as one word. So this can be treated as one word. So the problem is that this modifier, which is comma plus who, is automatically applied to that single word, or at least what is considered a single word. This automatically applies to both. So this is a problem because it contradicts what we're told. So this is wrong. Does anybody know how you could fix this? In the text box, if you've got any fancy ideas for how to fix it, and still keep it as one sentence, then go ahead and type. Both of whom doesn't work because that's incorrect. The context is that Professor X won a Nobel Prize. And this is, I mean, you must preserve this context. So only Professor X won the Nobel Prize. So the first two, I mean, some people have typed there in the text box, and some people have typed both of whom. Those don't work because they're lies. They're not true. Like, it's not true that they both won. So we need to restructure this sentence in a way such that only Professor X has won the prize. So if you know how to do that. Okay, on the stage with Professor Y is, that would work. Possible fixes, let's do that. Okay, many possible fixes. See if I can fit all these into one. Let me move all this stuff upstairs a little bit. Okay, so more room for possible fixes. One possible fix is on the stage with Professor Y is Professor X, who recently won a Nobel Prize for his work. That's one possible fix. Another fix is, yes, one of you, Hertanto is the student who put this. Maybe you know which problem this is modeled after, because that's exactly the way they do it in that problem. On the stage are Professor X, who recently won a Nobel Prize for his work, comma, and Professor Y. There's another one that's on the list here that's also going to work. On the stage is Professor Y, along with Professor X, who recently won a Nobel Prize for his work. And then here's one more fix that I want to show you. Actually, I'll make this a quiz. On the stage are Professor Y. Let's still do Professor Y and Professor X. Let's see if you guys can fill in that blank. Because there is a way to fill in this blank that will make this work. Does anybody know how to do that? So if you put who, then you've still got the same as the original sentence. You can't put Professor X here because that would create a run-on sentence. So that's okay. These that don't work, you can't put who because that creates the original issue. You can't put Professor X because that is a run-on sentence. It's also known as a comma splice. You can't. It doesn't matter whether there's a comma or not because this is still considered one word. So even if it's comma even if it's without comma, it still doesn't work. Now you're getting warmer. The latter is getting close, but the latter by itself is still a run-on sentence. But you're getting warmer. There it is. It's in the box. Right. The latter by itself still creates a run-on sentence because the latter recently won a prize is a sentence by itself. But you can do this. You can say, instead of saying each of whom or both of whom, you can say the latter of whom. That will work. So these are the different ways to have a workaround of this and being treated as a single word. Now also, the other thing I want you to notice is the singular and plural quality of these words here. This is are, this is, and this is are. Notice that the subject of, what is the subject of this sentence? The second one, the second fix. In the text box, what's the subject here? Yeah, because it's Professor X and Professor Y. So even though there's a modifier in there, you just ignore the modifier, and you have this compound subject which just happens to be interrupted. So there you go. On the other hand, what is the subject here? I mean, should this be are, or is this okay with is? What is the subject of this sentence in the text box? What's the subject? A couple of you are typing, yeah, the subject of this sentence is just Professor Y. Because along with doesn't do this. Along with is just a modifier. So Professor Y by him or herself is the subject of this one. So along with Professor X, we can just eliminate. So that's, you know. You do that. Okay, any questions about any of this crazy stuff that we have just done? Okay, if you have a question, go ahead and type it in the text box, please. But, okay. Well, I mean, this is not a whole problem. I mean, the question is, what's the difficulty level? The first comment, and probably the most important comment that I can make, is you don't really care what the difficulty level is. Because this is sentence correction. I mean, the point of studying sentence correction is just to learn certain rules. The rules are the rules are the rules. You should just know them, and it doesn't make any difference what the difficulty level of the problem is that they appear in. You know, because the rules are the same no matter what the problem is. And the only real difference with difficulty level is that they put more stuff in the way. So this is something to keep in mind. If you guys are even thinking about difficulty levels while you study sentence correction, then your priorities are totally off. It doesn't matter. What matters is the rules that govern these problems. Okay. Let me type a couple more of these takeaways onto this list. It's a huge problem with tons of takeaways. Okay. So if you have a compound nouns, so compound nouns, which are X and Y, and lists, which are like X, Y, and Z, should be treated as single words. Okay, unless you have some sort of construction such as the latter, or the former, which explicitly splits them. And then the other takeaway is if on sentences such as X is or are Y, if X is eligible to be the subject, then X is the subject. If all of X is ineligible to be the subject, then it's a backwards construction. And Y is the subject. So it's definitely a mouthful. There's a lot of stuff going on in this problem. Any questions before we move on to something else? Give me a smiley face if you're ready to move on to something else. There we go. Okay. Let's do this. Okay. Let's look at this slide right here. Okay, give this a shot. I'm going to try to keep this discussion brief because we got about, say, 5-10 minutes remaining here. I'll go over a little bit because we got a late start. But we got a call in about 10 minutes. So give us a shot. I'll give you 1 minute and 15 seconds, and I will clear your answers here. Okay, go for it. Okay, one person has spotted a mistake here, which is that there should be an underline. Let me fix that for you. This should be underlined. Okay. Thank you. Let's try to get answers to this problem in the next 15 seconds or so. Okay, everybody pick something, please. Let's get on to an explanation here. I noticed a couple of people are typing questions. Oh, you guys can see each other's answers? That's not supposed to happen. No, okay, remember, okay, you guys are answering the question in the wrong place. You're supposed to be answering the question up there with those buttons that say A, B, C, D, E. So those, you cannot see each other's answers, which is the point. You can still see that? Okay, you're not supposed to be able to see that. I will look into that. That's something I know the default is that you're not supposed to see that, but I guess I can look into that for the next study hall. Okay, yeah, that's not supposed to happen. So let's take a look. In particular, I want to discuss, okay, the first thing is the context. Context question, of what is there no proof yet? This is a very important question. What do we not have proof of? Go ahead and type in the text box, please. It's the healthcare. Okay, right. So the context is, like, we know that household appliances generate. I mean, it's a fact that household appliances generate magnetic fields. That's not being disputed here. But there's no proof that those fields cause a health threat. So the problem with B then is that B is incorrect modifier. Like you've got that pose any threat to health is tagged on to household appliances. So that's just not the right meaning. It violates this particular context that we're talking about. So that's not correct. And then proof, I mean, D would mean that the proof itself, because if you look at this modifier, there's a bunch of problems in this choice, but this would mean that proof poses a threat. So that's not going to make any sense either. Now, E I'll just help you dismiss because E is not idiomatic. Okay, there's no proof for something. It's just a poor idiom. Proof is of, not for. Okay, no such thing as proof for something. The correct idiom is proof of something. And that's the reason why E is not right. Now let's talk about A versus C. Here are a couple of examples. Okay, you've got to be very, very, very careful. You should be, in a takeaway, you should be extremely suspicious of the following construction. Preposition plus noun plus verb ing. Verb plus ing. Because if the action is what we're talking about, then this is wrong. Like let me give you an example. Okay. If I say something like, there is no evidence of unicorns living anywhere. Or, okay, there is no evidence of my brother stealing the candy. Okay. The problem here is that we're not looking for evidence of my brother. We're looking for evidence of stealing. And so this is incorrect. Because this means evidence of my brother stole something. So this is incorrect. This is incorrect because we want evidence of his stealing, not evidence of my brother. Now, there's another version of it. Now, this is going to be really weird, but there is no evidence of my brother's stealing candy. Now, this is technically correct, but it's just horrible and awkward and would not be accepted because of its horrible awkwardness. But I mean, this is the way you have to do this. So the deal is that if the verb ing is the object of the preposition, then this construction is wrong. So if the action is the intended object of the preposition, then this construction is incorrect. Let me fix that object over there. Okay. So this is there. So that's what the problem is here. Okay. Proof of fields posing. The issue here is that the intended, what we have proof of they're posing a threat. It's not proof of the fields themselves. This is the intended reference, and this is the intended object of. And that's not how it works. The actual object here is fields. So this is why this is incorrect. In general, if you see this sort of construction, you should be incredibly suspicious of it. Okay, it is correct in some instances. Let me give you an example. So, preposition plus noun plus verb ing is only correct if the preposition, if the actual noun is the intended object of the preposition. Okay, here's an example of this. I gave $5 to the beggar walking on the street. Okay, in this case, this actually works because this really is to the beggar. And then this part here is just a modifier. So that part there is totally disposable because it's a modifier. And so you wind up with a simple prepositional phrase. So that's the only condition under which this is allowed to be correct. But if the verb ing is an actually necessary part of this prepositional phrase, then it's wrong. So especially if it's of the noun verbing, I've never seen a context in which that is actually correct. Ron has never seen an official context in which of plus noun plus verb ing is correct. So if this is an of, from what I've seen, it's probably never going to be right. Now you should still do this sort of analysis to it. But this is the most common example. In fact, that's what happens in this problem. And it doesn't work. So that rules out A. And that leaves us with C, which is idiomatically proper. There's no proof that. So you can also have proof that clause. It doesn't have to be this idiom. This is one example of a correct idiom. But there's also another way you can write a correct idiom for this, which is proof that clause. So that's what is going on in C, and C is the correct answer. Any questions? not, we're going to close it up. We're going to close up shop here, so to speak. And yeah. Let's see here. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about this problem? Smiley face if you understand this takeaway and this stuff on this slide. Very powerful. The question is, how do you fix A? You would fix A by basically converting it into C. That's pretty much the only way to do it. Because you can't make minor fixes to A. Because if you do, the only minor fix you could make would be something like this. And as we've said, that fix is still fatally awkward. So the only way to fix of fields posing is to change it to proof that fields pose a threat, which is exactly what choice C does. So really the only reasonable way to fix A in this problem is to turn it into C. Okay, I hope that answers your question. So there's one other person typing a question here. Okay, I'll wait a second here. Okay. Hold on just a second. Okay, so we are finished. We are actually a little bit over time, and I've actually got another appointment that's starting pretty much right now in about 3 minutes. So there's one user who's typing a question. I guess I'll wait for that user to finish typing a question if it doesn't take too much longer. But other than that, if you are ready to go, then you can go ahead and log yourself out. Thank you for attending the study hall, and I will see you next time, which is we have a Thanksgiving holiday intervening, so next study hall is 3 weeks from now. That's December, I believe it's December 3rd, although I may be off by a day or two. So I think it is the 3rd, if I'm not mistaken. So a little bit later, that one's going to be 6:15 to 7:45 Pacific, which is 9:15 to 10:45 Eastern. So if you want to come, I'll be there. If not, you can just quit Illuminate. You don't need to do any sort of special process to log out of it. You can just quit the program entirely. If you do not do that, I will just go ahead and log you out in the next minute or so. And I thank you for attending.